Hello viewers, my name is Omoyele Sowore. We welcome you once again to Sahara TV live out of New York City. Today is Saturday, June 22nd, 2013. At this moment, we will be talking about President Barack Obama's trip to Africa. As you all know, it's always a big deal when a U.S. president decides to go to Africa. It's never a big deal when Africa president decides to come to the U.S. In some places it is, but it's really, really big deal. The country Nigeria was left out of that trip, and Nigeria is pissed right now. Nigerian government cannot explain why Nigeria was left out of it. So we had a chance yesterday to actually talk to one of the officials of the U.S. government to explain what happened and why Nigeria is not on their list. And they said, well, you know, Nigeria has its own security challenges at this time, but they're just not on our mind this time. Next time, we'll go back there. That means, diplomatically speaking, Nigeria is not important to them. But we always love to analyze this in our studio, and it's always a pleasure to have a brother of mine here, Milton Allimadi, who will help us look at this trip to Africa, discuss why is it that Africa is always been told what is good for Africa by people around the world. Sometimes it's China saying it, Canada telling you. You know, sometimes even countries that are not up to its state, or a neighborhood like Denmark tells Africans what to do. And now it's a big deal that Obama is going to Africa. You know, I mean, how long is Africa going to keep waiting for these kinds of visits to get its act together?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on your show again, and to your esteemed viewers from around the world. And you ask a very important question, and what you're actually saying is, when will Africa take control of its narrative?
Absolutely.
And then its destiny? And obviously, the president's trip comes at a unique time also in Africa's history. The African Union, as you know, just celebrated the 50th anniversary of when African leaders met in Addis Ababa 50 years ago.
Yes.
And formed the Organization of African Unity to chart a path forward. And I think the question, if you were to ask today, to what extent have the leaders of today accomplished some of the missions that were espoused 50 years ago? I think the answer is very sadly, in terms of moving toward an Pan-African Union, that has not been accomplished. There have been very insignificant strides. And I always, when I come to your show, I say the same thing. Until Africa can take control of its destiny and the narrative, it will always be like, if the president of China is going to Africa, what's in it for China? If the United States president is going to Africa, it's what's in it for the United States. And right now, the U.S. is becoming much more interested in Africa because China has made significant economic advances, and the U.S. wants to sort of counter this and catch up.
Yes.
But it's not what is in it for Africa. And that's when we have to seize the narrative and take control.
Well, you from Uganda.
Yes,
and there's one country that has come up in the news recently, a senior military commander in Uganda.
General, right.
Yeah, general. Wrote a letter. I mean, he granted an interview saying, look, you know, I'm tired of this nonsense over here. And because the president of Uganda, Museveni, Yoweri Museveni, is grooming his son to become the new president of Uganda when he's gone. Right. Their neighbors, Zimbabwe, the man who is about 90 years old is running for election again. You know. Again, you know, Uganda is known to be one of the lapdogs of the U.S. on the continent of Africa. Right. Conversely, Zimbabwe is not. Right. So, I mean, let's start from Uganda. You know, what do you think this is going to lead to? You know, what's going to happen from this Ugandan general who has...
Thanks for asking that question. The first thing is I'm happy to say President Obama is not going to Uganda under a different set of circumstances, he might have been going to Uganda. Remember, Bill Clinton actually is the one who, when he traveled as president many years ago, embraced this Ugandan leader, Museveni, the leader of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, and the leader of Ethiopia at that time, the late Meles Zenawi, and sort of sold them to the world as a new crop of leaders, which was completely false. These leaders, one thing they had in common was their militaristic approach. They're very anti-democratic, and they rule basically with the use of the military in these countries. In Uganda, Museveni has been there for almost 30 years now. This is 28 years. So for President Obama, who's saying that he wants to go to emerging African democracies, and that's why he picked Senegal, and he picked South Africa, of course, and he picked Tanzania, which has done a remarkable job in democratizing in the last few years. And obviously, he could not include Uganda, and I think that's probably why Nigeria also was not included.
Yes.
And then going back to your question, look, Museveni wants his son, whom he's promoted to a brigadier, who is above a colonel, to succeed him, and people think by 2016. And this General David Sejusa, who actually fought together with Museveni when they seized power in 1986. They fought together 5 years together in the bush. They were comrades. But he's been there for years, and now he's saying enough is enough. First of all, I imagine he resents that very soon he would have to be saluting Museveni's son.
Yes.
And first of all, I understand that you have to be in the army for at least 20 years before you're considered for promotion to a colonel. He's been in the army for 12 years. Now he's a brigadier, who is, of course, above a colonel. This is the kind of symptoms of Africa, an abuse of power that needs to end. And I think that the United States had been closely linked and supporting Museveni for many years. I think finally Obama may be saying, maybe it's time to part ways. And I read that as a very important message. Him not going to Uganda, and this general now abandoning Museveni, and then going to London. And in fact, in his BBC interview, he said that, number one, Museveni needs to be removed. And then he says the Constitution of Uganda has an Article 3, which says that anybody who abrogates the Constitution, who subverts the Constitution, and who threatens the Constitution can be removed by any necessary means. This is very serious, coming from his closest, one of his closest generals and commanders.
Wasn't it true also recently that, I mean, this was later denied by the Ugandan military, that, you know, somebody fired a shot close to Museveni when he was getting to one of his bodyguards, you know, but they came back and said it wasn't true.
Yeah, that was a bit of a murky story.
Yes.
But under the set of circumstances that's going on in Uganda right now, nothing would be surprising. His son actually commands a unit called the Presidential Guard Brigade, which is one of the largest units in the Ugandan military, and it's the best equipped and the best paid.
Trained, yes.
The best paid, of course.
So let's go to Zimbabwe, where, of course, another election is coming up, and, you know, the grandpa of African dictators, Mugabe, says he's running again at the age of 90. I mean, what do you think should be done about, because the reason I'm asking is that there's this confusion here in this part of the world. Some people actually see Mugabe as a hero.
Yeah, well, yes. I think part of the problem is that the opposition has also not, in the last 3 or 4 years, Morgan Tsvangirai, who was the major and leading opposition figure, has actually, I have no way to explain it, but maybe he just got tired of being the opposition leader. Because, in fact, I read a New York Times story about 2 months ago that says he's basically been co-opted into the government now. He's accepted a multi-million-dollar house. He had a multi-million-dollar lavish wedding when, as we know, many people in Zimbabwe would actually thankful if they can put a meal on the table, pay school fees for their children, and then pay for their living expenses. So the opposition has actually disappeared in Zimbabwe. And in fact, the same New York Times article said, if the elections, or when the elections are held, it would not be surprising if Mugabe wins and Tsvangirai actually loses. Loses again. Now, there is also in the government of national unity, and I think it's Matambara, I can't get his name right. I think he is probably going to be one of the leaders in Zimbabwe. He seems to be much more principled compared to Tsvangirai, and much more interested actually in the destiny of Zimbabwe. But to me, the key thing is this. I think so long as African countries collectively don't have a vision and a plan, Sowore, my brother, we will be having this discussion 5 years from now. Yeah. Our children will grow up and be having this discussion.
Yes.
50 years from now, when the African Union
would have been 100 years.
Has its 100-year celebration.
Yeah.
And it's very sad because Africa has all the resources. That's why every country, major country in the world, is interested in Africa. Yeah. China isn't in Africa because they have a particular love for Africa. Yeah. The US isn't going there because of particular love for Africa. Africa has the resources. The Congo alone has $30 trillion worth of resources. So multiply this. Not all of them have equal, but many are well endowed in resources. So imagine if they had embraced some of Nkrumah's vision. And Nkrumah said this, and he was right. He said, you have come out of a long relationship, basically, first of all, the era of slavery and then colonialism, because the West wanted your resources to fuel their economy. They're still going to need the resources to continue fueling your economy at the terms that they dictate. So how can you change it? You can change it by coming together and forming an African Union with a powerful army so that when they come for your resources, you negotiate on terms that are also beneficial to Africa and to Africans to improve their welfare and to improve their lives. They did not listen to that advice. I guarantee you, if the set of leaders today don't follow some of this vision that Nkrumah espoused 50 years ago, in the next 50 years, as I said, we'll be having this same conversation again. When in fact, if we did the right thing, in 25 to 30 years from now, the conversation that African leaders should be having is, how much aid should we be giving to England, to the United Kingdom?
Well, we've been giving them aid. And
we've been giving
them aid anyway. I mean, all the resources that they take at their own.
Thank you. But we want to give it on our terms this time. Yes. But you're right, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, they've been stealing, and that's the stealing that we need to find a way to stop.
All right. So one other thing is South Africa.
Yes.
Yes. So Mandela is on the verge of death. You know. Do you think his death will mean a lot within the political space in South Africa or not?
Well, I think Mandela has been retired from politics for many years now. I think his passing, his transition, would be a symbolic era, and it will also allow his life again and his achievements to be assessed, to be analyzed, and it would allow media to examine where South Africa is today. So South Africa will once again be analyzed in major news media, and from that perspective. But Mandela has not been running South Africa for many years now, after he had one term and he moved on. But obviously, he is one of the most revered Africans, revered in Africa and revered globally. And whenever you mention Mandela's name, you have to contrast with the current crop of leadership in African countries. And that's a sad thing, that a man who's at the twilight of his life is so much more respected compared to any other leader that is out right now. You name it. You tell me. At least in the early 60s, for whatever their failings, the Nkrumahs, the Patrice Lumumbas, the Sékou Touré's, they had a vision.
Leader to
They had a vision. They had a vision for Africa. Whether the vision was realized or not, that is another issue. What is the vision that African leaders have for Africa today? That is my question. Wow. You can't live from paycheck to paycheck.
Yes.
And that's how many of these
they're not even
running,
living from paycheck to paycheck, as you know. They're living on borrowed
paychecks,
borrowed funds. Finally, what should Obama do or say as an African himself? He has an African gene and blood. What should he say during his trip that you think might shake the continent, that will make it different? Is there any message he needs to send out there to African leaders, the people of Africa, that things have to be done differently?
Okay, I'm happy you asked that question, because when he actually went and spoke in Ghana and addressed the parliament in Accra in 2009, he said many of the right things. He said the days of the big man, the big names, the iron rulers in Africa is over. We need to build institutions now that will endure, so that it doesn't matter who is actually the president. The institutions will allow African countries and the continent to develop. Said the right things. But in action, the practice did not meet the rhetoric. The U.S. still supported Kagame in Rwanda and Museveni in Uganda. I see it's changing now, especially after they kept invading the Congo again, just to steal Congo's resources, not caring that millions of Congolese are dying. So they seem to be moving away from that. So if this time the president actually says, I came to Senegal, to South Africa, and to Tanzania, because these are emerging democracies, and we are only going to support emerging democracies, then that will be enough. Africans don't want handouts all the time from the United States. Africans have the resources. But our leaders, corrupt leaders, with outsiders, have been stealing and plundering. If you can help us end that, we can build our own vision of Africa. That's what Africans should demand of the United States president.
Well, Milton Allimadi, he was the founder and publisher of Black Star News. You're an in-house analyst, commentator, and we love you, and we want you to come back always to talk about Africa until we get it right.
I'm always happy to come here, because this is one of the few fora that allow us to talk openly about our issues and attack the outsiders who mess us up, as well as our own leaders
who are not getting it right
at home.
Well, that's very good. Thank you for coming. Viewers, it's been Sahara TV live interview segment, and I've been talking to Milton Allimadi about President Obama's trip to Africa. So we hope you hang around and get more of our programming. Please do not change the dial. We'll be back.